Hola chicos, welcome to Señor Flynn's guide for los verbos reflexivos. En español se dice verbo reflexivo. Okay, so that's what we've been focusing on recently in class. These little guys, these little verbs that have the se on the end. Okay, in English they're called reflexive verbs. Reflexive. Okay, if you think about reflexive, it may bring to mind things like reflect, reflection, and those are good things to have in mind, as you will see, because it definitely applies to what we're learning right now. So, sit down, pay attention, listen to my voz, take a look at what I'm trying to show you, okay? At any time you get confused or lost, the good thing about the video, you can pause, rewind, re-listen, redo, okay? So if you need to do that, please do so. Okay, so let's get started. ¿Qué es un verbo reflexivo? ¿Qué es un verbo reflexivo? Okay, we have here two pictures. And the verb in question we're going to be talking about is brushing your teeth, which we know is a little weird already. We've been using that verb with our says. So, here, one verb is reflexive and one is not. And thinking about what reflexive means, do you have any idea which one would be reflexive, which one wouldn't be? Think about it a moment. Take a look. The perro is reflexivo, but the mother and her hijo is not reflexivo. And why? What do you think? What does that mean? Okay, let's take a look at the Spanish real quick. El perro se cepilla los dientes. So there is that se. The other sentence, la madre cepilla los dientes de su hijo. The mother brushes her son's teeth. No se. Not reflexive. Why? Why do you think that is? Well, let's talk about a verb. So remember, every verb has a subject. The subject is what is doing the action, okay? The subject is completing the verb. It is doing the verb, okay? See that arrow there? It is working on the verb. Now, as we've seen before too, sometimes verbs can work on objects themselves, okay? So the verb then is going to go and impact something. That's an object, and we've talked about DOPs now for weeks. Okay, so that should be familiar. But now, something happens when the object and the subject are the same. Let me repeat that. These reflexive verbs are important because the subject, i.e. the person doing the verb, is the same as the person the verb is acting on. If you think about it, the action is reflecting, boom, back onto the subject. Okay? That's why we call that reflexivo. So while there is someone doing the verb and something the verb is impacting, there's only one person involved with that action. And that is the key important point to be made here. Okay? So, in this picture, in our first picture, look at the little perro brushing his teeth. Crazy. He is the one doing the brushing, and he is the one getting the brushing. He is the subject and the object. They are equal. Therefore, it's a reflexive verb. However, in our second photo, the person doing the brushing, the mother, is obviously not the same person who is receiving the brushing, the son. So therefore, the subject and object are not the same, and so are therefore not reflexive. Does that make sense? I hope so. It should make sense. The action is not reflecting back on the mother. There's not one person who is both doing the verb and receiving the verb. It is not reflexive. Okay? Now, here are some of the reflexive verbs we've used in class. Unos ejemplos de verbos reflexivos. Okay, en clase. I'm going to go through, I'm going to pronounce each word so you can hear and refer to this video when you're not sure of how to pronounce something. Okay, always refer back here. Notice, each verb has a say on it. That's part of the way we write them in the infinitive form. They come with a say. Okay, if I were you, I would pause this video and make sure I have all these words down while it's still on the screen. Okay, bueno, yo pronuncio en español. Afeitarse, bañarse, despertarse, entrenarse, estirarse, levantarse, mantenerse, maquillarse, peinarse, ponerse, prepararse, quitarse, relajarse, secarse, vestirse, acostarse. Take a minute, make sure you have all these guys down. When you're ready, continue to play. Now, what I'm about to say is so important, I actually typed it out word for word so you could see it. Hint, hint, chicos. It's real important. Okay? So, listen carefully. Everything with a reflexive verb is the same as everything we have already learned. They will be conjugated when and how other verbs have been conjugated in the past. If the verb needs to be conjugated, drop your AR, ER, or IR, put on the correct AR, ER, or IR ending. Not any different. If it does not need to be conjugated, then simply leave it alone. The only difference is the addition of that little word se, which has to be dealt with for sure, and it is not easy. But the verb itself is not changing at all. It's this little word se that we have to work with. So, what do we do with that little se? Let's take a look. When you use a verb with that is reflexive, and remember, you will notice that it's a reflexive verb based on this little se right there. Okay? Now, whenever you go to use the verb, you have to change that se to match the subject. Okay, obviously the word doesn't match itself exactly, but the person you're referring to with the word has to match because it's reflexive. Remember, that's the key point. It is reflexive. The subject and object are the same. Okay, now, fortunately, as you can see here, a lot of the little words that se turns into, we already know. Yo me lavo. I wash myself. Notice the use of the word myself. That's English reflexive. Myself, yourself. Okay, his self, herself. Tú te lavas. Te for the to form. We've used these in class, right? Me and te. Now, here's where things are a little different. Él, ella, usted se lava. Okay? Not lo or la, like the DOPs. Not le, like gustar. Se lava. Okay? Nosotros gets nos again, and vosotros gets os again. Those are familiar. Now, ellos and ustedes se lavan. They share the same word with el, ella, and usted, which is sort of a first now. That's a first for us. Because with gusta, remember, it goes from le to les. And with the DOPs, it goes from lo and la to los and las. Now it stays the same as se. Okay, so if you need to pause, record this information somewhere that you will see it. Okay, very importante. Now, unos puntos importantes. Some things I want to draw your attention to. First, notice, él, ella, ellos, ellas, usted, and ustedes all use the se for their reflexive pronoun. Okay? You can see that very clearly. All use se. So that kind of keeps it kind of easy. You only have one for those 5 words. Okay? They do use the same one that you are seeing in the infinitive form. That is the same word. That's se, se. Okay, the infinitive form uses the el, ella, usted, ellos, ustedes form as the standard. Okay, don't know why. It doesn't really matter why for our purposes. And finally, the other ones should look very familiar. Remember, don't create extra work or stress for yourself. Spanish is reusing these pronouns. It's the same for DOP, for gustar, and for these reflexives now. Me, te, nos, and os. Okay? Now let's move on to some examples. Look at the little chica. She is getting dressed. She gets dressed. Notice the Spanish. Ella se viste. That little word came out in front. Okay, it's going to be se still though because it's ella form, and then we conjugate vestir. Vestir, E to I stem changer. Totally normal. Do the stem change. E is the ending for an IR verb in the ella form. Ella se viste. Now, here's the important moment. Look at the translation. She gets dressed. That is the weird part. You have to realize with these reflexive verbs, in English we do them so differently. We always add all these extra words. She gets dressed. In Spanish it translates literally as she dresses herself. But if you ever want to say she gets dressed, don't try to look up the word for to get and try to find the word for dressed. No. Use your reflexive verb. Conjugate it. She dresses herself. She gets dressed. Same thing. Ella se viste. Okay? Let's try another one. Yo me entreno los brazos. So the verb we're using here is entrenarse. AR verb. Notice on the infinitive we have a se. But here when we're using it now, we conjugate it. Yo me entreno los brazos. Again, let's look at our translation. Excuse me. This is what throws students off. Because you in your head know the English, and so when you go to think of the Spanish, you want to say, how do I say I am? Oh, I don't know how to say working out. You also want to say my arms. Notice in the Spanish we don't say my arms. It's assumed that it's your arms. You just say the arms. So, the translations are very different. That's the real key, the key issue here. Yo me entreno los brazos. Literally, I work out myself the arms. Okay? So spend a minute, look that over, repeat that in your head to yourself. Think about the translation. Look up from this video. Say, oh, if I want to say I am working out my arms, yo me entreno los brazos. Okay, do that. Take that extra step. Peel your eyes away from the screen and do some thinking. Okay? Next, tú te cepillas el pelo. You brush your hair. Again, in English, we don't say you brush yourself. That's reflexive in English, yourself. We use it a lot less. Yourself. In Spanish, you have to say it. Tú te cepillas el pelo. Okay? Remember, reflexive because she is receiving the brushing and doing the brushing. Okay, and then finally, this one's important because it has an example of reflexive and not reflexive. Él se baña y él habla por teléfono. So he is taking a shower. Again, notice the translation. He is taking a shower. You don't look up the verb to take and then say a shower. Although that is possible with this verb. Side note. But él se baña. He bathes or washes or showers himself. That's how we say it in Spanish. Okay? And then he talks on the phone or is talking on the phone. This is not reflexive. This is old stuff. Don't start throwing down mays and says and tays everywhere. He's talking on the phone. There is no object of the verb to talk. You're talking on the phone. That's not really the object. That's a prepositional phrase. Okay? That's not an object. You can't speak. He's not speaking the phone directly. He's using the phone. So there is no object. It's certainly, if there even was an object, it wouldn't be the same as the person speaking. You can't speak yourself. Okay? So, not reflexive. That habla. Okay? Important question. Where do these new little words go? One good thing, if you've learned your DOP roles, you already know where they go. These little mete and say can only go in the same exact places that a DOP can go. So real quick, let's review those three places. A DOP can go first before a conjugated verb. Notice those examples we just went through. Okay, each one of those verbs was conjugated, so the little word came out in front. Changed a little say if you have to still, but whatever the word is going to change into will come out in front if the verb is conjugated. Okay, or if the verb is an infinitive, it can be attached to the end, just like you see whenever you look up the infinitive form and you see the say on it. Okay, and finally, it can be attached to the end of a mandato. Remember, a mandato is a command. Okay. So, take a look at some examples of these. Before a conjugated verb.